everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Max Chira from Express Capital Financing. You got Michael Jensta and Paul Vigary from Hubzu, as well as my father, Martin, as well from Express Capital Financing. And as we mentioned, and as you guys probably saw in the flyers, this is the second webinar, a part of a series where we're going to constantly go into different concepts for investors that they want to keep in touch with to understand the market better, different ways that they could acquire properties, how auctions work. There's going to be a lot of different educational bits and information that we'd love to share with you, how you could get financing to acquire these properties. Sometimes maybe even a trick, right? Because sometimes you can't always finance them up front. So how you can go about that on the back end. So again, this is our second version. This is the first live event. The last one was a recorded event where we went ahead and showed you guys exactly what we're going to talk about. If you have not heard it yet, we'll go ahead and send it out in the next email, which has this recording on it as well. And we'd love to see you guys for our future series. So Mike, good afternoon. How you doing today?
All right, doing great. Yeah, so happy to be here. Thanks for having us. And one of the things we wanted to talk about was really kind of the default process and how homes get into the default cycle, right? And that's where investors are finding some of the deals out in the marketplace today, because it's a challenging market. Values in a lot of different marketplaces are starting to slip. We saw that at the end of 2022 and continuing into 2023. We're here at January 17th, and people are expecting the real estate market to hopefully get back to normal around Q3 of 2023, which means we'll have that balance of properties that are going into foreclosure and properties becoming REO and getting back to some normalization. One of the big stats I read from Adam Data the other day was that in 2022 there was double the amount of foreclosure foreclosure filings than 2021. But if you think about the pandemic, there was very little in 2021, right? So it went from something like 110,000 to 200. It was basically 111% increase in foreclosure filings in 2022. And everyone's projecting that to be a little steady in 2023 to follow that path until we get back to that normalization. But a healthy foreclosure market is going to have about 500,000 homes that actually go out to the foreclosure steps per year. And we're at about half that right now to get back to pre-pandemic levels. And so one of the things that we're seeing as a trend is investors going earlier in the distress cycle, because if you think about kind of the headwaters of a river, when there's a drought, you have to go further and further up the mountain to find the water, right? And so that's what investors are doing right now. And like when I started in this business, it was 2006, and we were jumping into the Great Recession, and I was working in the real estate auction business. And almost all of the investor product available was bank REOs, it was bank-owned properties. They'd go to the foreclosure steps, maybe 15% sold to investors out there in cash, and the rest, reverted back to these banks and whoever was servicing them, and then they would fix them up and they'd vacate them. And they'd either sell them, but the market was depressed, or they would sit on the market, and you go to these ballroom auctions that we did across the country, right? And that's how you'd buy these REO properties, or there'd be REO lists that different REO agents had. But today, you have to kind of go a little deeper into the distress cycle to find those properties. And so I'm going to share my screen and show a kind of a visualization of that. All right, so can you see the full screen, or are you seeing?
We can see it just fine.
Okay, perfect. And so as we think about the default cycle and how to acquire opportunities in that cycle, let's go to the next slide here, right? So we think about pre-foreclosure, like how does a mortgage go into default? And people are, these loan officers, they get mortgages, and basically it's a missed payment, like a payment doesn't come in. You miss one payment, your bank might call you and say, hey, you missed your payment, are you going to pay it? And then the second missed payment comes in, and now you're kind of 60 days delinquent. That's when the bank usually gets official and sends you what's called a notice of default. Now you're actually in the foreclosure cycle, right? You've been given a notice of default as a homeowner, you missed 2 payments, and nothing real has happened. And the next stage is called a notice of sale, where the bank basically says, hey, this person's not paying, we got a deadbeat on our hands, something's happening with this mortgage, it's in default. Now we're going to do a notice of sale, which means we're going to put a date out and says, this is going to be sold on the courthouse steps. In judicial and non-judicial states, that sometimes these auctions happen out on the courthouse steps. I'm in Texas. It happens on the first Tuesday of the month. Same thing happens in Georgia. In New Jersey, it's a sheriff's sale. It's done, usually in a courtroom, once every week or two, sometimes once a month in the smaller counties. It's different from state to state, right? But you're going to get a date that says like, hey, you haven't been paying your mortgage, you're in default, you've been notified, now we're going to sell your house at foreclosure. And then ultimately there's that foreclosure sale. So in some states, it can be really quick. Like in Texas, it can be 1 month after the notice of default. And in other states, it might take up to a year, even more. Like in some of these judicial states, Florida, New York, and New Jersey, it can take years. It got a lot more efficient before we went into the pandemic in some of those states, and then everything kind of shut down, and we're kind of in the restarting phase. But ultimately, that's leading to a foreclosure sale. But in between here, in the pre-foreclosure process, there's a couple different opportunities to acquire those properties, right? And some of these are the most common ones, the top 4 here. One is buying the paper, right? Like you have a non-performing loan, like before the bank actually goes and forecloses on it here, you can buy that loan. Now, this gets a little difficult because most of these mortgages are sold to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they get into these giant non-performing loan pools, and you usually have to pay a couple $100 million to buy one of those pools, and maybe be a nonprofit or some giant bank or institution like Goldman Sachs is going to buy something like that, and your average investor can't really do that. But there's still a lot of paper out there on the streets. Some of that comes from private money lenders, some of that comes from individuals. Like if I own a house and I want to sell it to a guy who wants to live in it, I can give that guy a mortgage and have someone service that loan. And if he doesn't pay his mortgage, I have to do something with that non-performing loan. I can sell that paper. I'll show you in a second where we can find some of those non-performing loans too. But Max or Marty, do you want to talk about a non-performing loan and the financing options? Usually you have to buy the loan, and then what happens?
Correct. So the first thing you got to do is buy the loan. Now, once you buy the loan, what happens is you own the paper to the note. You don't really own the property yet, right? So what happens there is that actually makes financing kind of complex. Well, not really so much complex. It's just different, right? It's more, we'll call it creative, right? So in this scenario, you would need to have a little bit more liquidity than the average purchase, right? Because number one, like Mike said, normally they're being sold, let's say in bulk. The second part of it is, even if you are able to find a lender where they have some notes that they could sell your way, and it's not a big bulk of them, you would still have to hold those enough where you can, number one, either foreclose on the property, or number two, maybe have the person make due on the payment, and now at least you own the mortgage and you're still getting a return on your investment. But at that point, I would assume, you're anticipating the seller, the owner not being able to perform, and you are eventually going to take over that asset, right? Once you've taken over the asset, now you have the ability to refinance. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind also is that a lot of private lenders, a lot of the DSCR products are going to have seasoning periods on these mortgages, which means that they want you to hold the property for X amount of time before they are willing to use the as-is value of the property. What they will allow you to use is your purchase price of the property, but technically speaking, in the scenario, you don't have a purchase price, right? If you wanted to just leverage, let's say, the amount that you use to buy the note, I'm trying to see how that would actually show on paper. But I would assume that would come into a lot of questions and actually be very complex. So your best bet would be is to hold the note for 6 months and then refinance that asset using its as-is value to be able to collect your money back, right? So at that point, what you're looking at is, hey, how much am I buying this property at, right? What am I paying for the note? And what is the LTV on that note versus the value of the property, so that I can understand if I'm getting into a good deal or if I'm getting into a really tight deal, right? Because don't forget, you will have some cost in addition to finalizing the foreclosure in order to take the asset and put it into your own hands.
And that brings up the other option too of, you know, hey, you bought the note off somebody, you contact the homeowner and say, hey, you know, you're in a sticky situation here. There's a non-performing note, you're in default, you know, this is going to go to foreclosure. How about I give you a couple $1,000s and you sign this deed in lieu, and you sign the property over to me. I forgive the mortgage and I give you a couple $1,000s, you know, kind of like a cash for keys scenario when you have an occupied property. I know a lot of non-performing note buyers do that when they're buying these things individually. Or you're going to have to take it to foreclosure and, you know, hire an attorney if it's in a judicial state, or hire it, or even in a, you know, say a non-judicial state. Sometimes you can hire an attorney to manage that for you, or a trustee to do it in some of those trustee states like California and Arizona, to take it through the proper foreclosure process. But you're going to need a servicer that's actually following all the laws. There's a lot of laws around owning a mortgage, and how you notify people and all those things that have to happen, or else they can contest that foreclosure and it can get canceled really easily. You know, the major banks and servicers run into problems all the time, and it can get really sticky as an individual. But that is a way that people have gone really far upstream to buy a property. The other one, yeah, exactly.
It's an outsourced function, though. I mean, it's possible, Mike. So it's not something that is so risky, scary that doesn't mean don't get involved. It's a viable investment where you can contact a professional that can handle this for you.
Right, and on Hubzu, we have about 550 loans on Hubzu right now, where you can buy individual non-performing loans. But since they are a kind of a financial instrument, we're not doing them as an auction like we would as a bank-owned home. You can make an offer to the owner, and there can be a counter offer, and there's a process that goes through that, and then servicing is assigned so that, you know, statements and notifications are being sent that kind of follow the rules for the state and the counties that you're in, because it can get really like sticky in some places and a little bit easier in others. So, but that is an option.
Not to jump around so much, but I would actually say that the deed in lieu is probably, buying the non-performing loan and then going into a deed in lieu is probably the most similar to managing a short sale, because it has less to do with, right? You bought yourself the exclusive right to negotiate that short sale, is kind of what you did for yourself. However, you still need to have that ability to deal with people, right? So for those investors that deal with short sales on the daily, and maybe they've built up a lot of capital and liquidity, and now they're looking to be able to do this more in bulk, that would be a great way to go about it, because you have that special skill set of being able to deal with the seller, understanding their hardships, where they're coming from, what's going to help them move to get to the next place, what their ultimate goal is, right? Sometimes it's not so much, I just want to sell this property. Sometimes it's, hey, I need to sell this and be in Wisconsin by my daughter who's in college there now, and I don't want to be here anymore, right? So sometimes it's really about getting to their motivation and helping them understand that process, which is going to ultimately help you negotiate those better. And to include on that, I would still always buy these notes with the intention of you needing to foreclose and spend dollars on that, because you never know what you're going to be faced with, right? Just because you hope to get it done that way doesn't mean it will be done that way. So always just protect yourself and make a smart investment.
Yeah, and obviously you want to buy that below the property value, as Max said earlier. Like if you're buying a note, you got to buy it way below kind of the property value so that you have that cushion, right? The other thing that happens when people are in default is that the bank actually negotiates with them a deed in lieu of foreclosure, and those become REO properties, right? The bank now owns the property. The person agrees to give up the property, and they leave it, and then you're able to buy those properties as bank-owned properties. And then Max mentioned short sales. You know, we haven't seen a lot of short sales in the past couple of years because there really hasn't been a scenario where people have been underwater. We're starting to see that. Like if you bought a house in where I'm in Austin, Texas. If you bought a house last year in Austin, you probably paid a couple $100,000 too much for it. And you're likely underwater today. Like you're gonna have a hard time selling that property for what you paid for it, or even 80% of what you paid for it. Because this market went up crazy, just like Boise, Idaho, and a couple of those places you read on the news, right? And so there will be a lot of people that are underwater, and if they lose a job because there's a recession coming up and they can't pay that mortgage that they got at 5 and 5.5 and 6%, on that house, they're gonna have a hard time selling it and they're gonna be underwater. So we might start to see short sales pick up. On the Hubzu platform, we've had 0 or 1 short sales over the last 2 years at any given time. We have 1 right now, but we predict that that number is going to increase as well as people find themselves in those sticky situations and they negotiate with their bank to stay out of foreclosure, walk away from the house, and just sell it at a loss, basically. And then the last, go ahead.
I was just going to say the really important thing, at least for the investors to understand, right? So it's the further along in this process that we get, the more likely the seller is to negotiate with you, right? So for example, if I miss my first payment today, I'm probably not so willing to negotiate, right? I've only missed a payment so far. Nothing really bad has happened to me. I haven't seen anything get scary. All of a sudden now I get a list pendant and a notice of default in the mail. I got a little bit more fear in me. I got a little bit more of an understanding of the situation that I'm in. And then all of a sudden I get a notice of sale. This is usually where people start to panic, right? And now I'm saying, oh, wow, my property's going to auction. What am I going to do next, right? But now keep in mind at the same time that your ability to help them understand this process of what we're walking you through right now and understand what they're about to face from the earliest stage is going to help you and them negotiate the best deal possible, right? When I have a very low amount of interest payments built up because I've only missed 1 payment so far, when I've only received the list pendant so far, and I understand, okay, whoa, maybe I had a hardship in work and that's why I couldn't make the payment. Now helping myself understand, is this hardship something that's going to continue? Oh, it is. I'm still in the same situation. Well, maybe I should fix this now where I have a lot of equity in my deal, where there's actually an ability for me to do something, right? The sooner you get to that, the sooner you get to the asset, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to put together a strong deal that works also for the seller and yourself. The further along you get into the process, the easier it's going to be for you to put that deal together. But now, again, you're starting to push harder terms, and sometimes not always something that could make sense or will make sense for the seller. So I guess what I'm trying to say is they both have their pros and cons, right? There's no, everyone has their niche of, oh, I come in at this part of the process and that's what's best for me. But kind of understanding the differences and being able to tweak them is what's going to help you really negotiate the best deal with your sellers.
There are also, sellers who are the last day, they wait for that foreclosure sale to start working on it and thinking about it, what they're going to do also. So that is to me, it's a great opportunity to get them on their unfortunate pain.
100%. There's, like we said, the further along the process, the more scared they are, the more they understand the situation that they're in, right? And nobody wants to lose their home. Nobody wants to go through a foreclosure. And people want to, at least if they are going to go through that, to come out with the best terms possible for them, which means that at least I could afford to move from my current home to the next one, right? Whether it's renting, whether I'm buying in a cheaper location, right? Because once they get foreclosed on, a lot of times the interesting thing is like everyone's situation is different, right? You might meet someone where their issue is, I'm in a $4 million house, but I shouldn't be in a $4 million house. I should be in a $400,000 house. And that's okay, right? Because they can actually afford to do that and things will make perfect sense for them. But once they hit the foreclosure and now it's on their name and now it says, oh, I had a property foreclosed on me. Now they can't even get to that 400K house. Now they're forced to rent, right? And maybe that's not what they wanted and that's what's going to complicate the whole deal. But that's why I guess what I'm trying to say is that the earlier you get in, the better the terms you could offer are. The later you get in, the higher the chance that your deal actually goes through, just because there's more leverage on the seller.
That's absolutely true. And I mean, the longer that the person like keeps their head in the sand, the less money, the less equity they're going to be able to take out of that deal. So they're eating up that equity by stalling. And so you're able to offer more for those properties, as a short sale early in the process. And that's why I wanted to jump to this next one, wholesale, because this can actually, be earlier in the process, right? You miss 1 payment or 2 payments to get that notice of default. That's where you can approach someone like before it gets really ugly and say, hey, let me sell your house. Like I'll sell your house to someone who wants to buy it, whether it's an investor who is going to take that house and flip it or turn it into a rental or maybe potentially rent to you. There's all sorts of scenarios here as a wholesaler to step in at any one of these points, right? And put those deals together. And correct me if I'm wrong, Max and Marty, on the financing side, this is a great opportunity where one of your customers could deal with this wholesaler and use a financing option to buy that house when someone finds the person that's in that sticky situation.
100%.
We could leverage, we could leverage their deals with the wholesale fee in there too. So yes, we could do that. But, just to the folks out there, if you're seeing what Michael is showing, these are just creative ideas on ways to purchase, to acquire property. So this is just 4 out of many, but these are very good ways to be creative on finding deals. Because they're
this is all pre-foreclosure too. So
Yeah.
No, because people think that deals are found, but they're not found, they're created, whether it's a non-performing loan, whether it's a deed in lieu, short sale, pre-foreclosure, wholesale, and it's always going, like Maxie was saying, to their pain points. What are their pain points? And that creates a creative deal.
True,
But,
and that's pain that hopefully you can fix.
Yeah, but I want to ask you a question. You were saying something about the pre-foreclosures, foreclosures have increased in 2023 now. What was that number you said again?
I said in 2022, they increased by 110% over 2021.
Wow.
And so far, we're just seeing kind of a steady numbers from 2022. We haven't seen anything. But we're projecting at all sorts that Q3 should turn back to kind of the normal pre-pandemic cycle.
Which is about 500,000 listings of foreclosures on the
half a million, about 500,000 actual properties that go through foreclosure. Yeah, that there are completed foreclosures. So.
Got it. Okay. I'm just wondering if any of those people were in that 2020 and 2021 that just dropped it because they saw it going nowhere. Now they're coming back on the table now in 22.
Well, when you think about the forbearance programs that the government was offering, there was something like 8 million people took advantage of those programs. And now there's a couple 100,000 that are still in the forbearance program. And something like 85% of those people that went into forbearance exited with a plan and it worked out. And the vast majority of those people, they signed up for forbearance, which meant that I don't have to pay my mortgage. I'll take 6 months off paying my mortgage. But over half of those people paid their mortgage anyways. They did it kind of as a security blanket, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like when you get a credit card offer and it gives you $10,000 line of credit and you're like, I think I'll get that credit card just in case something bad happens, right? I don't want to use it, right? Because they're charging me 24% interest, but I'll get it just in case. And
Get that.
and it's kind of what happened with that forbearance program. And then unfortunately, I think it's some of the lower value markets where, the Midwest and places where, like in Austin, homes are very expensive. In California, homes are very expensive. In New Jersey and Florida, homes are very expensive. But when you get into the sub $100,000 level in Ohio or Indiana or Iowa or some of these places, and a home value increased by 20%, right? Or 30% even. That just means it went from 60 grand to 80 grand, right? So it went from 60 to 80 grand. And if you took 6 months off your mortgage payment with forbearance, and then you took another 6 months off and didn't pay that mortgage, which they allowed you to do in the forbearance program, you're now 12 months behind, and any equity you gained in that property just got tacked on to the end of your mortgage, right? And so just on the scale of economy there, just because those houses also went up 30% in value, the dollar value wasn't enough to where they're sitting on a huge equity stake. If you bought a house in 2018 in Austin for 300 grand and went up to 800 grand and now goes down to 700 grand, you still have 400 grand in equity. Like, you can sell that house. You have options. You can refinance that house at a higher interest rate. You probably don't want to, but you have options, right? If you're in Cleveland or you're Akron, Ohio, or someplace like that, you don't have as many options. And they're going to run into some of these scenarios where they do need to sell the house, and maybe it's a short sale, or maybe it's a neutral equity, and they're behind in a payment because the recession took away a job. And that's might be what we're facing over the next couple months. But being prepared, Paul and I were talking about this a little earlier about, you know, when you go fishing and you're fishing all day and then all of a sudden you catch like 6 fish in 1 hour, right? If you're not prepared to fish throughout the day, like when the fish are biting, you're not going to catch any fish if you like give up on, you know, at hour 1 or hour 2 or hour 3. I went fishing with my dad up in the Sierras about 2 years ago now, and we fished all day long until 4 o'clock, and then we caught 10 or 12 fish, right? And being ready, getting your money in line, and having your documentation ready. So like there is going to be a point, you know, when there's going to be a lot of deals and the prices are going to dip, just like they do in the stock market, just like they do with cryptocurrency, except that happens every hour or two, right? And you're going to want to be ready to acquire that real estate, right? And so being ready, looking at all these different options and continue to do your research and looking at the market and looking for these deals and definitely working with your financing partners to be ready to pounce. That is going to, you know, help you be successful.
And Mike, I'd like to suggest that. So on our, you know, when you were using your fishing analogy, and I'm thinking short sales. So while this is the path of default and acquisition, on Hubzu, we have different inventory channels and different providers of that inventory. So if you think that what you'll plan to do is follow the Hubzu inventory timeline, it doesn't necessarily work that way. We have providers of wholesale deals, and they didn't get those deals because they went through the non-performing loan category necessarily. And so it's important when you're positioning yourself to just kind of have your ducks in a row with your financing provider and be prepared on our platform, because as Mike said, he fished all day and then they all showed up at one point. So if what you're looking for is a wholesale deal, be ready. And all of these deals can be good deals and good points to acquire properties, but it just being prepared is quite important, and recognizing that you're not going to time it perfectly on our platform where you're just following the life cycle to get to your perfect point. So participation, making realistic offers on these properties and having your financing in place is just kind of the way of being prepared.
And just to add to it, that, you know, don't time the market. You got to spend time in the market. That's all about real estate.
True.
You buy real estate and wait. You don't wait to buy real estate.
That's the 12 hours sat by the lake fishing right there, right? You got to stay there. You got to stay there for the day to get them at the right time and be able to capitalize on it. And just to go
I think Mark,
back,
yeah, just a second down on what Marty was saying, like, absolutely. Like if you see a good deal, it doesn't matter what the rate is. If the math works, the math works, you know, it doesn't matter what the time is. There's always good deals and tight markets. And like you said, you got to spend time in the market. That's great advice.
100%.
And part of auction is that it can be competitive, but not every auction is. And so some auctions offer better opportunities than others. And so Mike and I are firm believers in that first early auction. You know, people are getting their ducks in the row, and we run 7-day auction cycles. And so if you can do your homework and be ready to participate, there are good deals to be had at that point.
So Michael and Paul, what can you tell our guests about Hubzu? Like, how can they, you know, give them a little information about Hubzu and how they could be more aggressive on finding these good dealers of properties out there?
I definitely want to get to that, but let me just click this one thing on, because post-foreclosure is a lot about what Hubzu is about as well.
Sure.
And you know, I put here redemption as a way to buy properties as well. There's a couple of states where redemption really comes into play. And if you don't know where redemption is, like Michigan's a perfect example. Like if a property goes to the sheriff's sale in Michigan, and it sells for 100 grand, and the person owes 150 grand on that house, they have 6 months to pay that mortgage back, to pay what that person bought the house for, right? So the person bought it at 100,000 at the sheriff's sale, but the borrower owed 150. They can buy back that house for 100 grand, plus whatever interest rate they had on that mortgage to the person who bought it. They have 6 months to do it. if it's their primary house, unless it was vacated or abandoned or something like that. And so you can actually go to those homeowners at times, and this is kind of a sneaky way around it. If the investor bought it for 100, you can say, well, if I give you 110, you can buy that back and keep 10,000, and I'll buy the house off you, right? And now you are able to kind of circumvent the foreclosure sale. You buy a house that's in redemption. The person who lost the house gets an extra 10 grand. You kind of given them kind of a bonus for that. And you kind of snipe the house in a way, right? You can be at the sheriff's sale and you can buy 10 and maybe one will get redeemed by somebody. It's a very low percentage that actually happens to. But in Michigan, in Minnesota and Alabama, there's a couple of states, and California now, I heard they have some post-foreclosure thing where the homeowner can redeem themselves for a certain period of time. It's a new bill that just went through. You might need to do some research on that. I don't know the details on that legally. But some of these have a 30-day redemption and some have a 6-month. And I think on some of the homesteads that have been passed down over generations, it can last up to a year, the redemption period. So there's an opportunity to buy that way. Sometimes we find those on the Hubzu platform, but it's pretty rare. And then REO. I mean, this has been the lion's share of properties that are on the Hubzu platform in online auctions. They're bank-owned properties. They were at that foreclosure sale. They didn't sell to an investor. The bank took possession of them. Sometimes they're occupied and you need to evict somebody. Sometimes they're vacant, and you can take possession and change the locks and start doing the rehab on them. But those REO properties are the lion's share of the acquisition properties on Hubzu, and those are very financeable, especially the vacant ones, where you can go in and get a nice valuation on those and get the. You guys are going to do construction loans on those, I'm sure, as well. You mentioned DSCR a little bit earlier. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
I'd actually love to just kind of go in a little bit, and I know we covered a lot of the different steps in the process. So I'd like to kind of go and give you guys a quick overview as to like how and when you could finance each of these, right? So let's just start from the pre-foreclosure process, right? If the borrower just had a missed payment and you're buying the property from them, they have equity in the deal, you can actually finance that right up front. It's a standard purchase. There's no necessary steps to take to change anything or get creative, right? Notice of default, again, same situation. Now, we're going to keep going along in the fact that they all have a equity in the deal, because the short sales when they don't, right? So notice of default, same situation, standard deal, go ahead, purchase it. Notice of sale, I can still come in, purchase it, no big deal, standard transaction. Foreclosure sale. Now there is a small difference, which is now I'm more pressed for time, where I have to get my due diligence done before a certain time, and I have to close within a certain time frame, depending on where and how you're buying it, depending on the sheriff's sale, what kind of rules each one of them has, and what they're requesting from you, right? So when it comes to foreclosures, it definitely pays to start your relationship before you start making any bids with your lender, having these conversations, understanding what the courthouse is going to demand of you as the purchaser of this property, understanding your risks and what you can do, right? So a lot of the times people like to make sure that at least I have enough cash to buy this if I have to, but I'd like to finance it, right? Those are generally the best and most secure ways of going about it. But there definitely are ways that you can finance your foreclosure purchases straight off the bat. When it comes down now to the non-performing notes, we mentioned that you would have to buy it, hold the property for at least 6 months. Well, once you take possession of the property, you'd have to hold it for 6 months, where you could then refinance the asset using your as-is value. Deed in lieu, same situation, right? And that would be how you got, let's say, that's maybe how you held, one of two ways that you held the property that you bought the non-performing loan from. That one, same thing, hold it 6 months, you're good to go. Short sales, we deal with short sales every day, right? So these are your everyday purchases that come in from somebody who just doesn't have enough to cover they don't have enough equity in their property to pay off their seller and be able to make a profit, right? So generally what they're doing is they're taking a loss. The bank is agreeing to that loss and saying, hey, we're okay with that. Sell it for this price. Let's move on, cut ties, and we'll go from there. Great, no problem. That's definitely workable. These are time sensitive, but at the same time, they're also time negotiable, right? So you just have to have some skill either in negotiating with the banks or hire somebody that does that, right? There are many people that will negotiate your short sales for you. A lot of the times they're realtors, a lot of the times they're wholesalers or specialists in the short sale process that can help you get through that and understand all of your liabilities and risks. Wholesale deals, again, very simple. Those are treated as a standard transaction. Now, going to the post-foreclosure process, redemption, right?
I just want to add something to the chat, to this conversation. You know, when you're doing a wholesale deal, you're not physically buying the property, you're buying the contract. So whenever you're doing a transaction like that, whatever lender you're going to, hopefully it's us, but any lender you're going to, you want to put the contract under an entity because the lender will only lend to an entity. So it should be under the wholesaler and then / your company, not your personal name, whenever you're looking to do a wholesale deal.
100%. So again, wholesales, standard transaction, like he said, put it in and make sure your name's in, and all of these, by the way, your name should be the purchaser of the entity. That stands for all of these ways of going about it. Now, in the post-foreclosure process, redemption, that's a good one. I actually really like that way that you had about going around and being able to snipe that deal. Really creative. So when it comes to the redemption properties, you would, similar to the non-performing loans and the deed in lieu, you would have to hold that property. You would not have to hold that property for 6 months. I could finance that property today based off of my purchase price because there will be a purchase price recorded on that property. So if I bought it for 100, I could finance it based off of that 100K value. However, if I bought it for 100 and it's worth 200, or there's a lot of equity in the way I'm buying it, I may want, and usually that's not the case, right? Because it wouldn't have gotten that far if they had that much equity. However, if that was the case, you got a really good price on it, you may want to wait the 6 months so that you could use that as its value, right? So now you have less of your own money in the deal, but it won't stop you from being able to do it right away, right? So you have two options. I can go right away and use the amount that I purchased it for, or I could go the second way, which is going to be the as-is value, which will allow me to have less money in the deal if I bought it for less than the property is worth, right? When it comes to REO properties, very similar to, I would say, the short sale and foreclosure type of sale, where there is a lot of ability to negotiate with the bank or whoever is holding the property as far as timeframes. If I'm not mistaken, Mike, most of the time when it comes to REOs, they want to first put it out to the first market, which is, let's say, your primary homeowners, which are going to buy using an FHA loan, and then they want to wait like 2 weeks before they release it to investors.
That's usually, that's with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They have like a first look program where it's available on the HomePath site to sell to home buyers first, and it's usually 15 days or something. I think it's called HomePath with Fannie Mae and First Look with Freddie Mac, if I recall correctly. But a lot of the time, the REO properties go on sale occupied, and they aren't actually listed on the market with the real estate agent, and so you're kind of able to buy them before it gets into that scenario. If you're buying it occupied, it's when it's vacant. We usually don't have the auction end until after it's past that first period, if it's a vacant REO property, just to cover the base on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you repeat that, Mike?
Sure. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, if they foreclose on somebody, they have the first 15 days. You can only buy it if you're going to be an occupant, owner occupant, and you have to sign that as part of your purchase agreement that you are an owner occupant for that property. But if it goes for sale occupied before it's actually been put on the market as an REO, and a lot of the HUD stuff you see on the screen here, CWCOT, first chance and second chance. CWCOT it stands for claim without conveyance of title, and we're going to do a whole webinar just about that because it's a huge tranche of properties that is a great way to acquire properties at a lower price. But basically, those are insured mortgages by HUD, and those people normally had like an FHA loan where they put 3.5% down. And since that loan is insured by HUD, it normally comes onto the market for sale with that claim, but HUD hasn't taken possession of it, so they don't have the title to it. So before it can go into like the HUD home store, you can buy that property occupied, and it kind of bypasses those like first look windows for home buyers. So an investor can come in, and this is one of the things we like to talk about too, about neighborhood stabilization, right? If it has to go through this long drawn out process, it's really bad for the neighborhood, where you start to have blight in a lot of neighborhoods, especially if this is happening to a lot of homes, and investors can come in and they can fix these problems a lot faster, right? Like, who's better at coming in and buying a house and fixing it up and putting on the market? Like an investor in the local market that's working with a financing partner that can do it today, or at going through this long drawn out process. And then, hopefully it doesn't get stuck in this bureaucracy that's tied to the government, right? And so investors are much more nimble. They can be much more fiscal when it comes to doing these rehabs as well. And they can turn a distressed property into a non-distressed property a lot more quickly. And so when you have these programs, which are designed with everything positive in mind, but sometimes it draws out that process and has a negative impact on the communities, because it's not just one house, right? It's dozens of houses, if not hundreds of houses. And if you get into some areas that are more economically depressed, you can see what happened to places like Detroit in 2008 to 2014, right? It fell apart. And you see these communities just like being decimated by default. No one's expecting that to happen this time. It's certainly not at that level. Even if it was at 10% at that level, we're talking about thousands of homes, right? And that can have a big impact on a community when you're not going in and fixing the problem right away. It's like if you hear a little ticking in your engine and you don't go to get a tune-up, you're just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And a year later, you need a new car. Like, just fix it, and we can fix the problem, and things can move on. So.
And based on that, is it kind of like you're saying also, my ability as an investor to perform on that and bring that to a close and a final product is also relying now on the next investor and the next investor in that same marketplace, right? Because we're all using each other as comps. We're all trying to bring those values up. But if one of us are not making that, and now all the property values come in lower just because we're not doing the right job, we're not bringing that community up, we're not developing in the way that it should be, right? And that's why a lot of these markets also, I think Detroit specifically, where they actually will incentivize people to go ahead and take over assets that are they've taken over by the city, because let's say the property was not in the right condition and it's dangerous to the public, so they'll take over those assets, and they're not just giving to you, right? You got to come into those deals with cash, because they're giving it to you with a lien on it. They're saying, hey, we're going to give it to you, but you better perform. You better actually bring this, you actually better beautify our neighborhood and bring our values up. And you better sell this property, because we want you to bring those values up. If you don't sell it, you bought it for 5K, 10K, all you're doing is bringing our comps down instead of up, which is what we're looking for. Right. So that's where the planning board, the city, are really going to actually have their say in things, not because they want to put their nose into our business, but actually in order to ensure that all of our businesses are doing the right thing, and that as a community we can grow.
Absolutely. And then, like the last tranche is just like a signature seller. That's what we call someone who's a private seller on Hubzu. At any given time between wholesalers and private sellers, right now we have about like 140 properties, something like that. And a lot of these are investors who bought a property, they put a tenant in it, and they're selling it with a tenant in place, or they bought it and they're just flipping the deal, whether they fixed it up or not. Or it's a land deal where you can do construction on it. Build for rent's a big topic in our industry right now. And a lot of cities are giving a lot of zoning options, especially, some of the more crowded areas that need some affordable housing. So that, there's lots of creative options to find, properties that are available today in the marketplace. And our predictions is that the inventory is going to grow over 2023 on the default side, especially as we get past Q2 and Q3. And things usually slow down a little bit in Q4. But so the normalization trend is something that we're looking towards in 2023. And that normalization means going, from where we were in 2019, which was a normal market, which dipped way down in 2020 from a default standpoint because of the pandemic. In 2021, it stayed low and it picked up in 2022, but it's not back to 2019 levels yet. And that's something that we're predicting to happen this year. We'll see if we're right.
Mike, I want to highlight the section signature seller wholesale, because I think that there were a lot of lessons learned by just consumers, homeowners during the Great Recession, and a lot of people had their credit wrecked. And so this is a new channel for Hubzu. It's an exciting channel. And I think it reflects the decision making. What people know what's going on in their own home, and when maybe it's time to make a quick sale before facing and walking through this default cycle. And so wholesalers are able to get these assigned contracts from someone that may be facing some version of stress, or they're distressed, and yet and it's hard to know exactly where they are at this point in making that decision to go opt for the quick sale. But I do believe many homes are finding their way onto our platform through this wholesale channel that would traditionally follow a more pre-08, let's say, follow the more bank-oriented process of landing, going through notice of defaults and following it all the way to REO. And then also I'd like to mention this signature seller group, and some agents are now using our platform to sell properties, because I think that the stigma of, if there is one, or if there was one, of auction is going away, because we've learned time and again, there's an auction premium. When you create a competitive environment with 2.1 million buyers, it's a great place for disposition, and it's also a great place for acquisition too, because there's just a ton of options available. But we're broadening the type of seller that's coming to sell a property, and the type of property that's coming. We're now selling new homes. We sell $1 million+ homes at this stage. So it's kind of becoming a diversified buyer pool. We have about a third of our buyers are homeowners looking for a house to live in. So when we're talking about making sure that homes are brought in front of homeowners first, well, we a third of our buyers are homeowners, and so it's just worth mentioning.
100%. And if I could include, you taught us a great lesson from the Great Depression. I would like to teach us a lesson also from the Great Ascension, right? We could trademark that later. But what I mean by that is, and specifically on the wholesale side, right? 2021, 2022 were just like the holy years of real estate, where it's like, if I didn't know anything about real estate and I went in and I bought an asset, I probably made $1 on it, right? And what that was doing was that it created a market of people that were overbidding and just beating out the next one, where properties were selling at crazy amounts above their asking prices or what they should have been sold for, right? So just like we could learn from the bad times, we could also learn from the good times, because I don't want to be one of those people right now that overbid so much on a property, and now I'm holding that property, and now maybe my value is not there anymore, right? Like you said, Mike, about your Austin market, right? Very specifically, Austin is probably one of the most the ones you can look at the most and understand this from, because there was a lot of cash coming in. People were just saying, okay, I'm selling something in California or New York where my property value is double or triple. I'll buy this for more money. Why? Because it's a great market. Yes, I understand that. But at some point, you've got to be able to justify that price. It has to be able to make sense for you to continue with it. It needs to be able to provide a cash flow with financing attached to it, because guess what? Most of your buyers, if you ever need to liquidate your property, are going to use financing, right? How many people do you know out there that can go and buy a commercial building with cash only? They can't, right? It's not that often that you find that person. So don't buy it that way. Even in times where It's fruitful. There's a lot of business out there. You still have to be careful. You still have to make sure that you're making the right investments. You still need to make sure that your numbers make sense. And at the end of the day, if the numbers make sense, numbers don't lie. We might lie, our numbers never lie.
Just to add
When
to
I
it,
say we, I meant as people, just to clear that up, because
Yeah.
I try not to lie. I try never to lie.
Thanks for
numbers don't lie, emotions lie. So, yeah, Max, you added a very good point also, because don't go with the assumptions of the value is just going to go up and up and up. It will over time, but maybe not today. So don't go with that assumption. Don't go with the assumption mode.
No.
100%. Always make sure the numbers make sense. Always make sure you see a clear exit strategy to your deal. Make sure you see a way to either hold it or sell it. If you can see one, or you see both options are available to you, more power to you. For those of you who are buying right now when rates are high, you guys are going to really kick ass in the next year. Excuse my language, but I felt necessary for this one. You're going to be able to refinance. You're going to be able to increase your cash flow with that. So now is the best time to buy properties. Now is the market that you want to be performing in, because it just leaves the most opportunity for you once you have the asset in your hand. I control it. I bought it for a lower price. I could always renegotiate my interest payment, but I can never negotiate my purchase price once it's done.
Like that.
Very true. Very true. Hey, this last screen, I just thought I'd show the Hubzu homepage, and if you go up to the buy tab here, this is where you can look at the different segments of properties that we have, on the site, and I tallied up what we had active today when we're recording this on what are we on? The January 17th. We currently have 638 active bank-owned properties that are in online auctions. 83 of the signature seller properties. Most of these are being listed by either wholesalers or just people selling their own homes. 495 foreclosure properties. Those you can't bid online for at Hubzu, although we do have a new app that we built when the inventory does return out at those courthouse step auctions, so that there will be an option for remote bidding. We just need some volume to come back at the county level. In the past, we'd have thousands of properties that we're marketing that were in foreclosure. And so at most of the large counties, every month we'd have, dozens of properties that we'd be selling. And so we've created a technology where if you don't want to go to Atlanta to bid on a property in Fulton County, you can stay in California and bid on it, or you can stay in Florida and bid on it. You can stay in New Jersey and bid on it, instead of taking your cashier's checks and going down to Fulton County or Gwinnett or one of those other, I think there's like 17 counties in Atlanta, but so right now there's 495. That's the number I think is going to, go back to pre-pandemic levels this year.
And you can bid across auctions, Mike. Share that you can bid across several different auctions simultaneously, which is a cool feature of this app.
Yeah, that is the true benefit. Especially in places like Texas and Georgia, those are two of the states that have a foreclosure sale on one day a month. So in Texas and Georgia, we call it Super Tuesday here in Texas. It's the first Tuesday of the month. Every county, all 254 counties, have their foreclosure sale at about the same time. And so if you're in the Dallas area and you want to be in Tarrant County, which is Fort Worth, or is it Dallas County, which is for Dallas?
Yep.
Yeah, those two counties are like 10 miles apart, but if they're having the auction at the exact same time and you have to have cashier's checks in both of them, you can't be in two places at the same time. You either have to have two people and two sets of cashier's checks, but those auctions are occurring at the exact same time. And if it's being marketed through Hubzu, we would have both of those counties on, and every other county, so you could bid in multiple counties in real time, basically. It's a technology that uses the blockchain and all sorts of things, but that's for another time. We can't go into that now. And then traditional sales, these are properties that aren't an auction, but you can just, the listing price is on there and you can buy it now or make an offer on it. And then I mentioned non-performing loans. We got 551 non-performing loans as of today that are on the platform and that you can be making offers on to those note holders. And we partner with some people to get those properties on the platform. So that's kind of the addressable market today, but it fluctuates every single day.
Mike, just repeat, what is a signature seller properties?
Signature seller, that's a private seller. So it's either a wholesaler that's brought a contract onto the platform, or, let's say I just wanted, like my dad has a property he wants to sell. I'm thinking about popping it on Hubzu. And, usually that's with an agent, but if it's a wholesale property, it's usually not. Sometimes it's a private seller. We've had new home builders that had some extra inventory, put some new homes on there. But it's not a bank or an institution that's bringing a property in, and that's what we've called that signature seller on our site.
What's the difference between signature seller and traditional? You said I heard you say, Mike, they're both for sale by owners also.
Yeah, the signature seller is in an auction, and a traditional sale is just, there's not an auction, it's a set price, or you can make an offer off that price. It's just not in the auction format.
Gotcha. But part of the signature is also, you said, wholesalers.
Correct.
Yes,
Well, the wholesale
Essentially-
properties, like those can be in auctions as well. So
Yeah.
they are.
Okay.
We sometimes internally refer to it as, say, non-default, even though wholesalers could be under some version of stress. But a signature seller property could be anything from new construction to a high end, to an agent listing a property, an individual selling his own property, or a wholesaler, then a signed contract.
Got it. Okay.
And guess what? A wholesale property is just as good as a property that comes straight from the seller, as long as the numbers make sense.
hey, a house is a house.
A house is a house. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing there.
Yes. Well, we greatly appreciate, everybody, staying in with us, listening to our presentation, helping you guys be able to decipher different ways to acquire your next investment. Maybe you're going to start to look, maybe you're going to spend some time on Hubzu and just feel the market out, see what you think, right, before you make your first move. If you guys have any questions, feel free to, number one, you could put them in the Q&A box. If we get any questions now, maybe we could answer them live. I think that would be real cool. But additionally, feel free to reach out to us. We're going to release the next date of part number 3 for this webinar series. So stand by for that. Everyone that's on this webinar is going to get an email with that information so that you could register right away. We're going to put part 3 out there. Mike, how many parts do we have? 5 or 7?
I think 6. So
6.
you hit both
Okay,
sides
I
there.
averaged it out. That's how we work, right?
You got the bookends.
So this is going to be a 6-part series. Part 1 was already recorded and should have been in the email that you guys all got when you registered for this one. If you want to go back and take a peek, please do. We're going to put the links for this one as well into the registration of the next one, right? So you'll be able to continuously refresh your memory, see what we spoke about last time, and then follow us along for the next bit of education that we're going to share, where we're going to be able to guide you guys through your next investment, make sure you guys have all the information you need to make that right investment, and start getting the right prices on your deal.
That's diving deep into the CWCOT, right? Claim without
Right.
conveyance of title. That's the motherlode. Like that's a big source of properties that's going to really
Yeah.
grow this year coming from HUD.
Yeah. You want to give them a little sneak peek as to what that is?
Oh, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but basically HUD insures these loans, and the U.S. government doesn't want to take possession of these homes. Like, let's face it, right? Like they insured the loan, somebody bought the house, something happened, not great, right? Like they're losing that house, or they lost that house. But HUD has there's 2 different bites at the apple there, we like to call it. There's first chance CWCOT, and that's where that property is going to the foreclosure sale. There's a price that's assigned to that property, and the second chance is post that foreclosure sale. And normally these homes sell occupied, right? And so you have to deal with the occupancy, and then you add your financing to it. But there'll be a lot of lower dollar properties, and a lot of properties you can put some sweat equity into. And so these are those ugly houses that investors like to buy. So
We buy ugly houses.
Yes, we do. Right?
Thank you all.
Well, thank you all for joining us.
Okay,
And
thank
stay
you,
tuned
everyone.
for part 3.
Okay.
sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.